Hello and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast. This is where you'll find extended versions of my interviews on public television. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today, what happens when the world's safety net falls apart? For decades, international aid has helped fight poverty, stop disease outbreaks, prevent famine, and keep fragile societies from collapsing. It's quiet, constant work. It rarely makes headlines, but it is one of the pillars of global stability, and now that pillar is cracking. The biggest shock to the system came last year when the United States, the world's largest humanitarian donor, shut down USAID. Other wealthy countries, including Germany and the United Kingdom, have also pulled back, and now the consequences are rippling across the globe. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, funding cuts have forced health clinics to close and weakened efforts to contain a deadly Ebola outbreak. The war in Iran has sent the costs of food and fuel and fertilizers soaring. What little aid was available in crisis zones like Sudan and Somalia has all but vanished. These crises seem far away, but the world, of course, is connected. Diseases cross borders. Starving people don't sit around patiently waiting for conditions to improve. They leave. And when fragile states fail, migration surges, extremism flourishes, and instability spreads. So how do we keep the most vulnerable societies from falling over the edge? And who, if anyone, is stepping in to fill the vacuum left by the United States? My guest today, David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, and just back from a trip to eastern Ukraine. He'll talk about the humanitarian need on the ground there and what America's retreat from the aid system means for the rest of the world. And because he also happens to be a former British Foreign Secretary, I couldn't resist asking about his country's own political future. Let's get to it.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our lead sponsor, Prologis. Prologis helps businesses across the globe scale their supply chains with an expansive portfolio of logistics real estate and the only end-to-end solutions platform addressing the critical initiatives of global logistics today. Learn more at prologis.com.
David Miliband, great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You just got back from Ukraine, so I guess I really should start with that. And not Kiev. You were actually Odessa, you were Kherson, you were a lot of places not far from the fighting. What are the things that surprised you coming like that?
Well, I went to southern Ukraine, southeastern Ukraine, precisely to see whether the macro narrative that the war's taken a turn, that Russia's on the back foot, that Ukrainian tactics are working. I went precisely to see, well, what's it like down in the guts of the country? And as you say, I went along the south from Odessa to Mykolaiv, big city now, 450,000 people. Biggest problem, rents are going up very fast, interesting. But also into Kherson Oblast, quite close to the front line.
Rents because a whole bunch of people from occupied southeast Ukraine have
moved to Mykolaiv. So the IDPs, the internally displaced people, when we're providing services to them, the biggest question they've got is, how am I going to pay my rent?
Got to send Mamdani in and freeze it for a couple of years is one way.
But further over, the brutality of the war, the scars that are visible and the scars that are invisible, but very close to the surface, are very clear. We're there extending services to places where the state isn't reaching. We're doing mobile health. We're doing psychological and mental health support. We're helping kids who, many of these kids, they've not been in education in person for 6 years. They had COVID 2020. They're now being educated online. And so what comes through, it's not a surprise in that sense, but never forget that while the macro position looks more favorable to Ukraine, or at least less favorable to Russia, if you're anywhere near the front line, you've got drones overhead perpetually, you're unlikely to get a fair night's sleep, and you're coping with the division of from your loved ones, because every place, I have in my mind a village of 300 people, it was 1,000 people. A village of 1,000 people was 3,000. A lot of people are in Europe. A lot of the men are serving. What I think is an important reminder is that, yes, there's a military battle. Yes, there is an economic battle, which obviously Europe is now fully behind economically the Ukrainians, but there's a social infrastructure that needs to be sustained.
If you had to choose between two, in the way that the Ukrainians that you met with feel between we must continue to fight at all costs and we must find a way to end this war at all costs, it would lean towards which of those and why?
I mean, if you talk to anyone who's suffered Russian occupation, and everything from the bombardment and the brutality to a woman at a cultural center there, in every town and village, there's a community center, in a way it's the leftover of the Soviet Union, the cultural center. She took me up to see Ukrainian costumes, and she said the soldiers, they mocked us for these costumes. They paraded around mocking us. So there's a deep sense of the brutality of war, but there's also no surrender.
And you and I, in the States, do see a change in narrative, do see this, the Ukrainians are standing up, they've got the cards. Is that feeling of we're actually doing better, does that mean anything?
Not yet. Not if you've got a drone overhead. Not if you've not seen your daughter and your grandson because they're refugees in Europe, not because it's really a long, long haul. And interestingly, the services of ours that are in greatest demand are mental health services. Just people said very openly, it's a taboo before the war, we need it now.
And I mean, in this regard, the work that you do in Ukraine is actually very analogous to the work that you do in Sudan or the work you do in Syria, all of these places, the human consequences of this war for the people that just have had their lives completely ripped up. Not the ones that are killed, not the ones that are fighting, everyone else.
That's a really good point. I mean, in Sudan, we're keeping people alive. In Tawila, they've fled from al-Fasher. In Darfur, water and sanitation, malnutrition treatment, some primary health care. It's life-saving. In the Ukraine context, it's life-changing because you're giving people support when they'd otherwise not be getting it, including from mobile health teams. But there are parallels there. The kids who have lost their parents and are being fostered and are being supported, if you're in Sudan or if you're in Ukraine, you've lost your parents. And so I think that our point is always the Ukraine case is an unusual one because most wars are within states, not between states these days. But the human consequences are very real. And if you can't sustain the people, you can't sustain the nation.
Now, the United States is going through a lot of debate about what role America should play in the world. Certainly a lot of opposition to these so-called forever wars, understandably. But also a debate over foreign aid, over American support. This recent Rockefeller poll that shows that Americans are actually more supportive than not of foreign aid. Tell me what you think the state of that debate is today and why.
Well, the state of the debate is confused, but the American heart is still beating strong. If you ask them, is it part of America's job to help the most desperate people in the world survive?
They say yes.
They say yes. And they say yes whether they're Republican or Democrat. Tragically, it's confused because they think, more than half of the population, that 20% of the federal budget goes on foreign aid, rather than the truth is, which is less than 1%.
Less than 1%, yeah.
And so that's the state of confusion. There's also confusion about where aid goes. But if I say to people, our vaccination program in 6 war-torn East African countries plus Yemen and Chad has delivered 36 million vaccines for, in the last few months, less than $1 a shot. Last year, $1 a shot. You can win support for that. And I think the whole aid debate has been confused, both deliberately and accidentally. Part of our job at International Rescue Committee is to say, don't believe the excuse that says, well, we don't know what to do. If people are malnourished, if they're abused, if they're desperate for education that's been interrupted, if they need healthcare, we've shown how to do it in a cost-effective way. And I think that's the critical task, to give people confidence that their money will be well used.
How much has in reality been clawed back? I mean, DOGE at the beginning of the Trump administration, which was shut down after spectacular failure some 6 months later, but a lot of the announcements of closures then got reduced. In actuality, looking a year and a half in, what is the real state of American foreign aid?
The real state of American foreign aid is massively reduced. I mean, America was the anchor of the global system, and it's no longer the anchor of the global system. There's some reactive commitments being made. we've got Ebola bouncing back in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo.
And the U.S. is providing support there.
It is, but it's doing it having previously cut the water and sanitation, latrines, healthcare support that was there with other international actors to try to contain disease. So we're paying the price in 2026 of the cuts in 2025, not just those immediately affected. I mean, my own organization, 2 million clients lost access to services in 2025. As a result, Afghan kids not getting educated, Sudanese refugees in South Sudan not getting healthcare, farmers in Niger not getting support for their agricultural livelihoods. They
specifically because of American cuts.
Yes, those are American cuts. Other countries have cut as well. But there's now some recognition, a dawning recognition, that if you take away all but the most quote-unquote life-saving aid, you take massive risks. If you don't have water and sanitation, if you don't have healthcare, you're risking infection, and infection will then maraud across not just Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, but into Uganda as well. There's even a case of a doctor in France now. So I think the state of American aid, the government says, the US government says 83% of grants and contracts have been cut. That's a measure of the number of contracts. In terms of the actual volume of aid, we'll wait to see how much of that which has been mandated by Congress is actually spent. But the American anchor is no longer there, whether it be on the sharpest of the sharp end, whether it be on the administration of global goods, like there was a famine early warning system was funded by America, and the gaps can't all be plugged by other players, some of whom are cutting their budgets as well. Interestingly, EU not cutting its budget and is actually looking to the period from now to 2035 to keep its budget up.
Now, a lot of the debate in the United States on policy has said, well, we need to recast aid so that it is in response to trade. It's in response to investment. It is connected to sort of real, direct, and tangible benefits the Americans are getting. I've also seen backlash against that from the Zambia government, from South Africa, from others. Is this a real change, or is this mostly hand-waving to assuage those that have been cut?
Well, I think it's apples and pears, really. The apples are trade is good. Trade should be fair. Trade needs to be negotiated. Trade should be of mutual benefit. Aid is there to help those who are on the receiving end. The clients of the aid system are not another government. They are the people who receive healthcare education that they wouldn't otherwise get. All of the record is, if you confuse those two, you don't get a healthy situation. And I would say trade and aid, not trade, not aid. For the people who need aid in Sudan today, or in Gaza today, or even in Ukraine today, certainly in the Democratic Republic of Congo today, telling them to trade instead of getting aid is not going to help them.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our lead sponsor, Prologis. Prologis helps businesses across the globe scale their supply chains with an expansive portfolio of logistics real estate and the only end-to-end solutions platform addressing the critical initiatives of global logistics today. Learn more at prologis.com.
When you see the amounts that the Americans have been providing on the ground to countries that are doing vastly better than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, at some point, one would say you've graduated beyond needing aid. And yet we all know that once you start a U.S. government program, any government program, it can be difficult to remove it from legacy. Same thing's true with military systems. Have you seen a lot of that?
Yes, I mean, that's a good point. One way of thinking about it, the fragile and conflict-affected states that I talk about, the Sudans of this world, 60% of the world's extreme poor live in those fragile and conflict states. They only get about 25% of the total aid budget. So to your point, the aid is spread too thin. The legacy systems aren't updated. The sunsets and the timelines need to be updated. Of course, there are countries that are middle income, Nigeria, Ethiopia, that have parts of those countries that are in desperate need. But I think it's a good point, and one that we make often, that we've got to focus much more of the aid budget on the most extreme poor. That's the purpose of the aid budget, after all. And for countries that are stable, especially upper middle income countries, they desperately need debt restructuring and debt relief. They need a healthy trade system. They need macroeconomic imbalances to be addressed, but there's a potential win-win there. But don't penalize the people who desperately need aid in the search for that.
Poorest countries in the world, poorest populations in the world, and also fastest growing populations in the world, sub-Saharan Africa. The Chinese are the largest trade partners. They're the largest investors. They've got over 1 million citizens living on the ground in those countries. Historically, they've done virtually nothing in terms of aid. Is that starting to change?
Not yet changing. They're still on the mutual benefit economic front. They're not really big players on the aid front. A bit of nuance on that. They've announced some money for Gaza, so there's politics. They're very committed to the World Health Organization, and America's obviously pulled out, allegedly because the Chinese were too strong. Well, this is going to make them stronger, obviously. So there's an important Chinese role there. But on the aid front, the Chinese are not moving in, but they can move in, and they're certainly present on the ground. And when America's absent on aid, absent on diplomacy, absent on economics, the vacuum gets filled. But
you're saying the Chinese at this point are not actually thinking long-term on this issue.
Well, they say, you've heard them, you go there. We're still a developing country. We're still got 200 million people in poverty ourselves. And they say we're doing a lot through the economic cooperation that we've got. Now, what's interesting, if you think about a country like South Sudan, next door to Sudan, there's a big Chinese interest in the oil. The oil goes through Port Sudan, but they're left helpless given the wars that are going on in Sudan and in South Sudan.
Now, middle powers are the other countries that in principle could be doing more, should be doing more. They don't want to be stuck just with the Americans. They certainly don't want to be stuck just with the Chinese. They don't suddenly trust them. Are we seeing more coordination from the Europeans, from other middle powers more broadly, to fill the growing vacuum?
Well, we're seeing the beginnings of it. It's quite significant that 6 months after his famous Davos speech, Mark Carney's now got a foreign policy and foreign aid review. And he's asking precisely the question, who do we collaborate with? How do we collaborate with them? How do we deliver aid in a much more cost-effective and effective way? Europe, interesting, the new financial perspective for the European Union, 2028 to 2035. People often say the European Union is a bit of an oil tanker. Well, one of the benefits of being an oil tanker is you set your course and then you've got long-term ability to drive efficiency. The new European Union budget proposes a 200 billion global Europe fund, 25 billion for humanitarian aid over the 7 years in euros. So we're beginning to see the effort by other middle powers to figure out, well, how are they going to make a distinctive contribution in this more chaotic world where the tragedy of the commons is more and more evident. Remember, Joe Nye died just last year. He talked about the Kindleberger trap, the lesson of the 1930s. If the rising powers don't step up when in the face of a declining power, you're going to suffer collectively. That's the issue that people are wrestling with today.
So we'll end with your neck of the woods, and happy 10th anniversary to Brexit, by the way. I know
not a very happy anniversary.
I know, but still, we got to celebrate as we can. Commemorate. The Brits, you continue. It doesn't seem to matter if it's on the conservative side or the Labour side. People are not happy with their prime ministers. Why do these governments keep falling?
Well, I think there are structural reasons and then there are contingent reasons. Brexit, you mentioned, is part of it.
Structural reason, yeah.
Well, Brexit is there as a drag anchor on the economic performance, but this isn't just about economics. It's about a government system that's too centralized, so people feel they don't have sufficient control. It's about a series of events, starting with austerity in the 2010s, then COVID, then the Ukraine war. There feels like there's been a battering. And there's also politicians being elected on vague platforms and then not being able to deliver what was anticipated, hopes being vested in an unspecific way. What we must now refer to as the previous Labour government, the Starmer government that ran until the middle of July, in a way, it never got its momentum going, because it came into government still searching for some of the symbolic policies that were going to make a difference. And then it was confronted by choices that were all bad. And that left it on the back foot for a lot of the 2 years.
We hear a lot about the Brits re-engaging with the Europeans. And yet over the last 10 years, on the regulatory front, priorities have been very different. Industrial policies, subsidies have been very different. It would be very hard, it seems, to actually repatch what had once existed. How much can be done to renormalize UK relations with what had been their principal market?
Well, I think quite a lot can be done. Remember, to your point, more 50% of UK exports of goods go to the rest of the European Union.
Yeah.
We're obviously an 80% services economy. Now, there hasn't actually been that much divergence. So the first point to say is there's quite a lot of room for the UK to make more benefit of the fact that it's aligned. Secondly, although it's not diverged far, there's still a lot of bureaucracy because it's now two different systems. That's holding back a lot of British business. You can hear that from the continent as well. There's a wider lens to this because Britain's detachment from Europe was so painful because it wasn't just an economic detachment. It was a social detachment. There's still issues about kids even doing school trips to between European countries, and obviously on the foreign and security front, there's been an institutional detachment as well. The reset that is now common ground across the Labour Party, that's something that's going to have to be pursued by the new government.
And I mean, Reform, it's not your party, but nonetheless, it's not clear exactly what a lot of their platform would be. Is that purely a reaction to we don't like the guys we presently have? Or are there some areas where they are legitimately tapping into the pulse of the British people?
They're tapping into a lot of grievance about economy, about public services, about the migration issues that we've talked about. Now, I think that they're certainly a grievance party, not a propositional party. But I'm always saying to people, what actually matters is, does the government have direction? Does it have clarity about what it's going to achieve? Is it building step by step going forward? Because I think what people are craving is a sense of direction, and that's what the new Prime Minister has said very clearly he's going to set out.
What's something you think the Brits could actually start getting much more right than they have?
Oh, there's loads of things. I mean, the UK is a country of an amazing potential. Think about universities, massive opportunity. Think about the ideas. There are 800 potential unicorns in the UK waiting for growth capital. That's enormous potential. UK has a lot to offer in cooperation with Europe on the foreign and security and defense policy. I see that as the way to build trust that can then be used on the economic domain as well. So I think the UK, don't count us out.
Europe today, is it stronger than it was 10 years ago in your view?
Well, it's not stronger, no, because it's not got the UK as part of it. It has an America that is now much more transactional with the European Union. It is deeply threatened by China's approach to industrial policy, massive numbers of German car workers being laid off by a series of car firms. So I think that Europe is still figuring out how is it going to come together with sufficient integrity to be able to be the force that it has the potential to be.
So what I'm hearing from you is the Europeans need the British more, the Brits need the Europeans more as well. That's where we're actually going.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Good stuff. David Miliband, great to see you, man.
Thank you.
That's it for today's edition of the GZERO World Podcast. Why not make it official? Why don't you rate and review GZERO World? 5 stars, only 5 stars, otherwise don't do it. On Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends.
Cox Enterprises is proud to support GZERO. Cox is a family-run company that has thrived across 3 centuries. We're building a brighter future in automotive, greenhouse agriculture, clean tech, environmental conservation, and beyond. Cox Enterprises, in the business of what's next since 1898. Learn more at coxenterprises.com.